Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the international edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 3 important columns that are very important for the mains examination. There are some points relevant for prelims as well. We are going to discuss these articles comprehensively, both from a prelims and mains point of view. Then we have few smaller articles that are relevant for the prelims examination. So before we start the analysis, we have a very important announcement. As you know, Conquer Prelims has started on our YouTube channel and as well as on the Unacademy app. Conquer Prelims is a comprehensive crash course to help you prepare for the upcoming prelims examination. Under phase 1 of the program, we are covering the most important static topics, and these classes are being held exclusively on the Unacademy app every day at 6 p.m. So yesterday, phase 2 of the program has started, under which we cover the most important current affairs topics from all the subjects, current affairs of the last 18 months, so that you can easily revise these current affairs topics. And these sessions are held on our YouTube channel every day at 7:30 p.m. So today, Sarmad sir will be taking up the second session of Indian Polity. So do watch the session live on our YouTube channel at 7:30 p.m. And Shyam sir will be taking up the last session of Indian economy under the static part of the crash course, which is on the Unacademy app at 6 p.m. The links for the same is provided in the video description, and also join our Telegram channel. Just search for Unacademy IAS English, join the Telegram channel so that when the session goes live, we share these links. You just have to click on it to directly access these sessions. And finally, our next batch, the English online classroom program, is beginning from 7th of May. India's top educators in the English medium will be taking up these classes for you. If you're interested in enrolling for the English online classroom program, do enroll immediately by contacting the number provided over here, because Unacademy is providing a massive price discount. We are celebrating the success of our IAS toppers. In the recently announced 2023 results, more than 300 toppers from Unacademy have been able to crack the exam. So we felicitated the toppers at Unacademy Manzil, which was a flagship event. And on this occasion, we are offering a massive discount of just $24,999 on our IAS courses. So it's a limited period offer. Do ensure you make use of this offer that is available. Now let's begin with today's analysis of the Hindu newspaper and look at this article from page number 10 of the international edition of the Hindu. This column talks about a recent ILO report that deals with the impact of climate change on the workers and the labor force. See, generally when we talk about climate change, we always discuss the environmental impact. We talk about the increase in extreme weather events, how it can affect agriculture, how it can affect the economy, how it can affect our infrastructure. But laborers and the workforce, they are largely neglected when it comes to the impact of climate change. As climate change becomes a reality, workers will face an increased risk of occupational hazard. There will be an increased risk to their safety, their health and well-being. And that is why the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has brought out an important report that links the impact of climate change on labourers and the workforce, and it provides few recommendations regarding how we can protect the workforce from the impact of climate change. This column has been brought out to mark the occasion of International Labour Day, which was celebrated yesterday on the 1st of May. So that is the context here. The ILO has brought out this report that talks about the impact on labour force as a result of climate change. As we know, extreme weather events are increasing, from deadly heat waves to forest fires to droughts and floods and cyclones and even landslides. These extreme weather events will directly affect the labor force, the workforce around the world. And unfortunately, there will be a disproportionate impact on manual workers, on construction workers, agricultural labor, for example. This will disproportionately affect the poor countries and low-income countries as compared to the developed nations. So given this disproportionate socio-economic impact on the labor force, it is very important to ensure that our labor force is made climate-proof. We need to build resilience into our labor systems to protect the workers, the employees, and that is the focus of this ILO report. So let's dive deep into the topic. Let's look at some important statistics. Let's see what the ILO report is talking about, what kind of hazards are present, what kind of risks could increase in the coming years, and what measures can be taken to protect the workforce. We'll also look at India in particular. We'll examine the various laws related to workforce safety and labor safety and carry out a detailed discussion on this important topic. So first, before I start, I would like to give you some important facts about the ILO itself, because there can be a prelims question on the International Labour Organization. So let's understand what is ILO, when was it established, and then we'll take a look at the article. The International Labour Organization was established in the year 1919, immediately after the First World War. World War I was brought to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. It was through this treaty that ILO was established to establish international labor standards. To protect the workforce and labor force around the world, a global organization was set up through the Treaty of Versailles, which brought the First World War to an end. Then after United Nations replaced the League of Nations after the Second World War, in 1946, the ILO was constituted as a specialized agency of the United Nations. So essentially, the ILO is a specialized agency of the UN since 1946. So this specialized agency of the UN is responsible for bringing out various conventions and treaties that focuses on labor welfare and labor standards. It's an international organization setting labor standards to be followed by countries around the world, to be followed by the employers around the world. It is the only tripartite agency of the UN that includes governments, the employers, that is the private sector, and as well as the representative organizations of workers and laborers. So all the three stakeholders in the labor market are represented at the ILO. It makes ILO the only tripartite agency of the United Nations. So governments are represented here. The employers essentially represent the private industry, and workers' representatives, workers' organizations, labor unions, they are also represented at the ILO. It is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and it functions under the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council of the UN, which is one of the primary organs of the UN. Just like UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, International Court of Justice, the UN Secretariat, these are some of the primary organs of the UN. Similarly, ECOSOC is one of them, the Economic and Social Council. So under ECOSOC, the ILO functions as a specialized agency. It is also a member of the UNDP, the UN Development Program. The ILO plays an important role in achieving the sustainable development goals of the UN to achieve a decent work life for all, to protect the laborers and the workforce, and to establish international labor standards and ensure that these sustainable development goals are achieved. And ILO plays an important role in this regard. So these are the basic facts about ILO which can come as a prelims question. Now, let's look at the ILO report that talks about the impact of climate change on labor force. This report was titled Ensuring Safety and Health at Work in a Changing Climate. For the first time, there is specific focus on the impact of climate change on our workforce. This report highlights the future risks that are going to be faced by the labor force, and it points out that over a third of the world's population is already suffering from the impact of heat waves and heat stress related factors. And as a result, 23 million work-related injuries are being reported every year. Because of the extreme weather events, the extreme heat being reported around the world, across different industries and different sectors, workers are getting injured. They are losing their lives as well. So amongst the labor force, mortality rate, morbidity rate has gone up as a result of climate change linked events. So according to ILO report, every year 23 million workers are getting injured, or even some of them are getting killed. Now this is a very significant, alarming number. Now let's look at another disturbing statistic. According to the ILO report, there are a variety of extreme weather events which are affecting workers around the world. For example, extreme temperatures, heat waves and other heat-related distress factors, floods, landslides, storm, essentially cyclones and droughts. These are the primary extreme weather events driven by climate change, which is affecting the workforce around the world. But the most disturbing fact here is that this burden is largely borne by the low to middle income countries. Essentially, the poor, underdeveloped countries, developing nations, they are going to face the higher burden, whereas the high income developed countries face a minimal impact. Because developed nations will have better labor standards, they will have better working conditions, occupational safety for their employees. So as a result, they are largely secured, insulated from the impact of climate change linked disasters. But this is not a luxury which is available for poor countries, low income countries and even middle income countries. So countries across Asia, Africa, the small island nations, the South American countries, they are at the receiving end. And obviously India should also be deeply concerned about the data, because as a developing nation, India will face a significant impact. The workforce in India will be severely affected by climate change related events. So the ILO has called for a complete reform of occupational safety and health standards. It is abbreviated as OSH. So when you're talking about labor standards, labor codes, OSH is a very important technical word. It stands for occupational safety and health of the workers, the laborers essentially. So in any country, there will be a set of laws and labor codes that deal with occupational hazards, and they try to protect the safety and health of the workers. So ILO is calling for a complete overhaul, a complete reform of OSH codes, occupational safety and health codes, so that worker mortality and morbidity rates can be brought down. Injuries that occur at workplace because of climate-linked disasters, the deaths that occur at workplace because of climate-linked disasters, they can be reduced, they can be mitigated. So that is the focus of the report that has been brought out by ILO. The ILO report also states that there are 6 key impacts of climate change, which primarily affects the labor force. Please make a note of this. The 6 key impacts include excessive heat, essentially heat waves, excessive exposure to solar UV radiation, ultraviolet radiation, which can even lead to various skin diseases and even skin cancer, extreme weather events like heavy rainfall, droughts, floods, cyclones, workplace air pollution, especially in tight work spaces where particulate matter and emissions are released. Workers might inhale the particulate matter and aerosols, which could contribute to respiratory diseases and disorders. Then vector-borne diseases, diseases caused by various deadly pathogens, which might increase as a result of climate change, and agrochemicals. Because of climate change, productivity in agriculture might go down. So farmers might be pushed to use more fertilizers, more pesticides, which could increase the concentration of toxic agrochemicals, and farmers and agricultural laborers will be exposed to these toxic agrochemicals, which could have a deadly health impact. So these are the 6 primary impacts identified by ILO's report. Now, according to the report, any such exposure to extreme heat or disasters or indoor work pollution or even vector-borne diseases or agrochemicals, it could have a detrimental impact on the health of the workers. It could subject them to heat stress. They could suffer from heat stroke. They could suffer from respiratory diseases. They could contract deadly infections. They might suffer injuries because of industrial fire or even due to forest fires. So all these risks have been specifically highlighted by the report, and the report also identifies the specific sectors where the workers are likely to be impacted. For example, agriculture and farming. This is one major sector which is going to be hit by climate change. So farmers and agricultural laborers, right, they are forced to work in the open, exposed to the hot sun and the heat waves and all the adverse conditions. Then construction workers in the construction sector, right? They have no other choice. Most of them are daily wage earners, manual laborers. They are forced to work in the open, exposing themselves to hazardous, deadly conditions. Gig workers, those who work for all these new age apps. It could be cab hailing apps like Ola, Uber, etc., the drivers who work for them, right? The various e-commerce and food delivery platforms where the delivery executives work for these gig platforms, right? They are called gig workers. So by the very nature of their work, they're exposed to the environment, the hazardous conditions present outside, right? It increases the risk for heat exposure, UV exposure, and pollution and exposure to disasters and extreme weather events. So gig workers face a big risk, and this is quite significant for a country like India. Because if you look at India's workforce, large part of India's workforce is employed in the agriculture sector. There are large number of workers in India who are employed in the construction sector, in the real estate industry, and a large part of workers in the gig industry who are gig workers. Then conservancy workers who work for municipal corporations and local bodies at city level who are involved in sweeping the streets, cleaning the city spaces, for example. Again, by the nature of the work, they are exposed to the dangerous conditions. Even street vendors who are forced to earn a livelihood by working out in the streets, by working in the open, they are also exposed. Then workers in transportation, tourism, and across few MSME industries, the micro, small, medium enterprises. By the very nature of their work, these workers are exposed directly to the hazards present in the environment, which are increasing day by day because of climate change. Now, if you look at India, India is at great risk. India's workforce is at great risk because based on the report, we can estimate that at least 80% of the country's workforce, more than 600 million workers in India, are exposed directly to these hazards. So you can imagine the risk, the vulnerability of India. So it's very important to protect our labor force and secure them by establishing the highest labor codes and standards in the country. So let's take a look at the existing laws in India that deals with workplace safety, that regulates the factories and industries, that establishes few labor standards in India. Currently, there are 13 different central laws that deal with labor standards and labor safety and occupational safety. For example, we have the Factories Act of 1948, the Workmen Compensation Act of 1923. So some of them are of colonial origin, which means they are outdated. Then we have the Building and Other Construction Workers Act 1996, Plantations Labor Act 1951, Mines Act 1952, because don't forget the workers in mines. They do hard physical labor day in and day out, and they are directly exposed to the elements of nature, from heat waves to rains to floods. So the risk mine workers are going to face will increase significantly because of climate change. Then Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. Migrant workers who leave everything behind in the rural areas and migrate towards urban areas for better jobs, for better livelihood, they are at great risk because they will not have a secure job, they may not have shelter in place, right? They may not have access to nutritious food and clean water. So they will face enormous risks as a result of climate change linked events and disasters. So there are these laws in India, around 13 central laws that deal with labor safety, labor standards. The Modi government has made an attempt to replace these old laws with a new set of labor codes under Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020, the OSH Code 2020. It's part of the 4 new labor codes which are being introduced by the Modi government. The new proposed codes have faced a lot of opposition. It has faced a lot of criticism by labor unions, by workers, and even by the industry as well. So as a result, the government has put it on hold. These codes have not been implemented yet. The new set of codes which were brought out, right, they do have better safety and inspection standards compared to the older laws. But because of criticism and opposition from the industry and workers, the implementation of OSH code has been put on temporary hold. It has not been notified, so it's not being enforced as of now. So if you look at, for example, the Factories Act, you can identify many shortcomings. In the Factories Act, a factory is defined as a place of work which has more than 10 workers, 10 or more. Only those industries and units have to register themselves under the law as factories, and only those workplaces are covered under the provisions of the law. But if you look at India's industries and factories, a vast majority of our MSME industries, they may not employ 10 or more workers, which means they don't fall under the definition of a factory. So they don't register at all under the law, which means these provisions, they don't even apply to many such factories which are under the MSME sector, which employ less than 10 workers. These are some critical shortcomings in the old laws, right? As a result of this, several lakh factories in India are unregistered. They're not under the purview of the Indian Factories Act, which means government inspectors are not regularly inspecting the facilities. They're not enforcing the law. And as a result, these places of work could become hazardous, dangerous for the workforce. The other problem is that when it comes to occupational safety, adequate measures are not taken by the employers, especially in hazardous industries. Let's say industries working with dangerous chemicals, industries working under high temperature, high pressure conditions, where industrial furnaces are present or boilers are used. So in many such factories, the proper safety standards are not followed. The fault lies with the employer as well. The fault lies with the authorities as well. Because under the existing labor codes, the labor laws that we have, state governments have been given the primary responsibility to enforce the labor standards and occupational safety standards. But the problem is that the inspectors at the state level, who are supposed to frequently inspect the workplace and enforce the laws, and if there are violations, they have to impose penalties, revoke the licenses of these factories. But many of the inspectors at the state level happen to be corrupt. There happens to be a corrupt nexus between politicians, corrupt inspectors and government officials, and the employers. So this has resulted in the derailment of these labor standards. Several factories, they bribe politicians and the inspectors and government officials. They get away with the inspections, even without following the basic safety standards and occupational standards. So this remains a major concern at the state level. The poor enforcement, the corruption, right? The poor standards and codes that we have, the outdated laws. So it highlights that India still has a lot to do when it comes to protecting the workforce from the future impact of climate change. Now take, for example, an occupational hazard like silicosis. Have you heard of silicosis? It's a deadly occupational hazard faced by many workers in many different sectors. Those workers who are constantly exposed to aerosols and particulate matter, essentially indoor workplace pollution, they suffer from a deadly disease called silicosis. So those who work in mines, coal mines for example, those who work in certain gems and jewelry industry, those who work in stone quarries, those who work in construction sector, in the wood and furniture industry, they are all exposed to minute particles of aerosols and particulate matter, which when inhaled get settled in your lungs and directly affects your lung capacity. It could lead to several deadly respiratory disorders, including silicosis. Silicosis is a fatal condition. It can lead to death. It is incurable, where your pulmonary tracts get blocked because of the deposition of the fine particulate matter. It's also called lung dust. Is that clear? So those who are working in sand mining industry, for example, construction industry, cement industry, right, and many others, they're directly exposed to such particulate matter, and if it deposits in the pulmonary tract, it leads to this deadly fatal condition, which is incurable. So you need very strong labor codes, occupational safety and health standards to protect the labor force. So given the impact of climate change and how climate change can aggravate these risks, it's very important that India brings out the new set of labor codes, and it should be in line with the ILO standards which are being recommended. So that is what we understand from this important column. Now let's look at the next article from page number 8. This article focuses on the topic of animal rights. It deals with a very delicate, sensitive subject, that is animal rights and prevention of cruelty against animals. The context here is that in India recently there have been many horrific incidents where pet owners or random people, they have caused horrific injuries and they've meted horrific treatment to domesticated animals, pet animals, which represents a gross violation of animal rights. Unfortunately, in India, even though we have a law that provides for prevention of cruelty against animals, it provides for punishment as well for the perpetrators, but still the law is not sufficient. It has not been effective in upholding animal rights and in punishing the criminals. Recently, there was a example that was set by Croatia. The European country of Croatia has set an example for the rest of the world by reforming its animal rights laws, by providing very stringent criminal punishment for those who abandon their domestic pets, for those who abuse their domesticated pets and cause horrific injuries and trauma to animals. So Croatia has led by example, and the writer says that that is something India should emulate. That is something India should try to follow. So let's look at the let's look at the animal rights related laws in India. Let's also look at what the Constitution says about animal welfare. It's a very important topic because every now and then in India, there is a controversy surrounding animal welfare and animal rights. If you look at the Indian Constitution, there are few provisions under directive principles, fundamental duties, and even under fundamental rights that directly or indirectly cover the welfare of animals and the protection of animals. For example, you have Article 48A, which mandates the state to work towards the welfare of animals, to improve the strength of animals, safeguard the wildlife of the country. Right? So it's an integral part of directive principles of state policy. Under fundamental duties, under Article 51A, Clause G, the citizens are mandated to protect and improve forests and wildlife and show compassion for all living creatures. So it's a fundamental duty of every citizen to show compassion towards these innocent animals. Then if you look at Article 21, which is one of the most important fundamental rights dealing with right to life, through various court interpretations, the right to life has been extended to cover animals as well. So right to life not just applies for humans, right? Right to life applies for innocent animals as well. So there are many precedents, there are constitutional provisions that highlight the importance that India gives for animal welfare and animal rights. Now, if you look at the laws that we have a specific law that deals with prevention of cruelty to animals, right? This act was enacted in the year 1960 by the Parliament. Is that clear? Now, there was a very important figure who was responsible for the enactment of this law. Can you find out who this was? I'll give you a clue. This person was a very famous dancer, very close to then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. This person exercised a lot of influence on Jawaharlal Nehru and convinced that such a law is necessary to protect animals. Through this law, the Animal Welfare Board of India was established. And this person, who played the leading role, would be appointed by Prime Minister Nehru as the first chairperson of the Animal Welfare Board of India. So whom am I referring to? Please mention the name in the comment section below. This individual, a well-renowned individual, right, a well-renowned dancer, played a pivotal role with regard to animal rights and animal welfare in the country. It's thanks to the efforts of this person that India has this law in place. The Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act was enacted in 1960, and it defines animals. It defines the various crimes that can be committed against them, provides for legal protection, and treats them as criminal offenses, and provides for punishments for those who inflict suffering and cruelty and trauma against innocent animals. Is that clear? It established the Animal Welfare Board of India as well. It refers to different forms of cruelty that can be inflicted, from serious physical injury to abuse and even eventual death of the animal. If any perpetrator is responsible for such crimes, he or she will be punished under the law. But however, there is a shortcoming in this law. That is what the writer is concerned about. Even though we have a law, there is an Animal Welfare Board in India, but still there are some shortcomings in the law itself. That is why the writer is urging India to look at the model of Croatia, to look at how other countries are being more proactive when it comes to protecting animal rights. So the writer is asking for an amendment. There has been an amendment proposed. The writer is asking for the amendment to be brought out as quickly as possible to make the law more stringent, to deliver strict punishment to the perpetrators of such acts of violence against innocent animals. So if you look at the shortcomings under the law, one major shortcoming is the poor enforcement of the law. The law enforcement authorities, particularly the local police, in many cases they are least bothered to register these cases, right? They see animals as dispensable. In many cases, police don't care about human victims. So why would they be bothered about animal victims, right? It's an unfortunate reality that exists at the ground level. There is very poor enforcement, very limited registration of cases, and even if cases are registered, right, police don't investigate thoroughly. They don't go behind the culprits. Even if they arrest the culprits and file charges, the penalties under the law are very meager. The punishment is simply not enough. If I explain the punishment provided, you will be shocked. See, there are some offenses, like for example, causing serious physical injury or death of an animal, can result in imprisonment. The culprit can be jailed. But however, the law provides an option of imposing a fine and doing away with imprisonment. Usually under criminal laws, it's a mixture of both. There will be imprisonment and fine as well. But here the courts have been given an option. The courts which are looking at these cases, right, even if the culprit is convicted, right, the courts can either imprison the culprit. The imprisonment is also very less. It's hardly for few months, maximum for few years. Or else they can let off the culprit by just imposing a penalty. And the penalty is very meager, as low as 10 rupees to few hundred rupees. So that is why most culprits easily get away under this law. It's very easy to get bail. the bail provisions are very easy under the existing law. Is that clear? So most of the culprits, they easily get away under this law. Even if a case is filed and if the culprit is arrested, they'll easily get a bail. And even if they are convicted, they are least bothered because the punishment is very minimal. Right? And there is a choice, an option given to the courts. Either it can be jail and imprisonment or fines. So in many cases, the courts prefer imposing a fine instead of jailing the culprit. Unless and until it's a very horrific case, right? Jail or imprisonment is not awarded. The courts simply impose a meager fine. Under the law, the fine is somewhere between 10 rupees to few hundred rupees, which is nowhere sufficient to establish a deterrent against these crimes against animals. So these are major shortcomings under the Indian law. Is that clear? Giving the option of imprisonment or fine has been one of the major flaws here. So that is why there is a new amendment which has been proposed in 2022. 2 years ago, the Modi government has brought out a draft amendment bill which is yet to be brought into the parliament and enacted. So through the amendment, some changes are being brought about. Some of the issues are being fixed. For example, the option of imprisonment or fine will be removed. Is that clear? There is a proposal to remove that. There is a provision for defining the 5 basic rights that will be accorded to animals, the 5 freedoms that will be accorded to animals. It enhances the punishments. The jail term has been enhanced depending on the gravity of the crime. Even the fine, the penalty, also has been increased significantly. And some new additional cognizable offences have been added into the draft amendment bill. So writer is urging the government to quickly enact this bill in the parliament, bring it out as an act, and ensure that the law becomes as stringent as possible to punish those culprits who harm innocent animals. Is that clear? Now, Animal Welfare Board of India, it also deals with many other issues related to animal rights. For example, circus animals, how they are treated, any animals used for recreation, animals used for religious processions, customs, etc. Right? Animals that are used in movies and in shooting, let's say, even TV series or web series. You might have seen, whenever a movie begins, if there is an animal used, right, they give a disclaimer that no real animal was harmed. Usually, they go with VFX and graphics. If at all the script demands an animal, they have to get approval from Animal Welfare Board. They have to follow the production team, right, which is making the movie. They have to strictly follow the regulatory standards established by Animal Welfare Board as to how the animal will be treated when the shooting is in progress. That is why whenever a movie begins, right, there is a disclaimer that no animals were harmed. It's a mandate by Animal Welfare Board of India under this law. Then even with regard to testing of animals, or testing on animals rather, right, in cosmetic industry, in pharmaceutical industry, right, testing on animals is a norm before certain drugs and cosmetics, etc. are tried on humans before clinical trials begin. So when it comes to cosmetics, animal testing has been banned by India. It is under the same law. Animal testing in the field of cosmetics is prohibited because it's not necessary. Right? Today there are better technologies to test out cosmetics. But when it comes to pharmaceuticals, drugs, vaccines, animal testing is still necessary, but there are strict guidelines, strict regulations which are enforced by the Animal Welfare Board under the same law. So India has a legal provision, we have a legal framework, but we need to fix the shortcomings, make the law more stringent, and establish a strong deterrent against these brutal crimes that some people commit against innocent animals. That is what we learned from this article. It can be important for GS paper 2 under polity and governance. It can be important under GS paper 4 under ethics as well. Right? Now let's look at the third article. We have an article on page number 7 which refers to the Global Plastics Treaty, which was being negotiated at Ottawa in Canada. If you guys remember, a few days ago, I had discussed this topic in complete detail. We spoke about plastic pollution, the hazards of plastic, especially single-use plastic, and we discussed the upcoming treaty, which is led by UN Environment Program, we spoke about this in complete detail. You can go back and watch this session. So we have an update regarding the Global Plastics Treaty, which was supposed to be finalized. Right? After many rounds of negotiations, unfortunately, the countries, they have not been able to agree upon a global plastics treaty. So there has been no final treaty which has come out of the Ottawa negotiations. So the UN Environment Program, which is working with all UN member states, more than 190 UN member states, it's been driving negotiations through the INC, Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, for the purposes of negotiating a plastic pollution treaty to prohibit the production, usage, and consumption of plastic. Right? An intergovernmental negotiating committee was established in order to achieve the goal of plastic elimination. Right? The idea initially, when it was proposed, was to ban all forms of plastic, especially single-use plastic. So there was a lot of hope amongst environmental activists that during the INC summit in Ottawa, we might witness the signing of a global plastics treaty. But due to differences between the countries, a final treaty has not come out. So now there will be one more summit which will happen at the end of this year in South Korea, in Busan. So hopefully we might get a global plastics treaty by the end of the year, because there is a deadline. In 2022, the countries gave a pledge, they gave a commitment that within 2 years, that is by 2024, they will have a treaty in place to ban the production and usage of plastic. This is a global commitment, an international commitment which has been made. So by the end of the year, there should be a plastics treaty. But however, there are major differences between the countries. For example, the major oil producing nations, right? They are not agreeing for the proposals of other countries, because plastics, right? Plastic polymers, they're all byproducts of the petrochemical industry. I hope you know that plastic polymers, they are non-degradable, right? They remain in the environment for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. They leach toxic material into the environment, and moreover, they break down into microplastics and enter the seas and the oceans and even the food chain. So plastic contamination is a huge environmental hazard for not just the environment, for flora, for fauna, marine organisms and food chains, and even for human health. So it's a necessity to eliminate plastic, especially single-use plastic, right? So oil-producing nations, they are trying to create a lobby, right? They're trying to protect their industry, because if there is a ban on production of plastics, right, it will obviously hit the petrochemical industry. It will hit the exports of these oil-producing nations. So that is one major issue. It's a major hurdle which is preventing the countries from working out a global treaty on plastics. Even others like India, US, they are against a complete ban, because as of now, we do have alternatives for plastics, but they are not affordable. They are not easily accessible. There are alternate materials which are biodegradable, right, which can be a replacement for plastics in packaging, in making various goods and commodities. Plastic can be replaced, but problem is availability, right, and also the cost. So this could significantly increase the cost for various industries. It could have an economic impact, a social impact, if there is a sudden ban and a sudden transition. So countries like India, US are trying to support regulation of plastic instead of an outright ban. They're calling for phasing out of plastic gradually and slowly, so that there is no sudden economic shock. There is no sudden impact on workers, on industries, and on the society as well. Because plastic today is omnipresent, right? It's present in every part of our day-to-day life. So imagine making a sudden switch, a sudden transition. This would incur a huge economic cost that could derail your industrial development, your growth agenda. So that's why India is a little cautious about the treaty. Even US and few countries, they are calling for regulation and a gradual phasing out instead of a sudden ban. So because of all the differences that came up at Ottawa during the INC negotiations, There has been no final treaty. They've just agreed on certain common rules and grounds, but they have left it to the next INC summit, which will happen in South Korea in November 2024, where the Global Plastics Treaty has to be finalized, because the UN members have made a commitment that by 2024 they will have a Global Plastics Treaty in place. So please monitor this development. It's still a developing story, right? And it can be very important for our exams. So this completes my discussion on all the big articles in today's newspaper. Now let's look at the prelim section. Let's look at article number 4. On page number 3, we have this article related to ISRO and lunar exploration. According to the article, a team of Indian scientists and researchers, they have detected some very important evidence regarding the presence of water ice in the polar ice caps of the moon. India's Chandrayaan-1 mission, it found direct evidence to establish the presence of water ice crystals in the polar ice caps of the moon. So this made India one of the first countries to have detected the presence of water, right? The terrain mapping camera, which was one of the scientific instruments, one of the payloads on Chandrayaan-1, gave us concrete evidence that water ice crystals are found in sufficient quantities in the polar ice caps of the lunar surface. That's why both North Pole of the moon and South Pole of the moon, they have been of great interest for space agencies. Right now, most countries are sending missions, lander and rover missions, and they have even planned future manned missions as well. And the focus is largely the South Pole of the moon. But there is a very interesting finding coming from India that the North Pole of the moon might actually have more quantity of water ice crystals than the South Pole. According to this study led by Space Application Center, which is one of the research institutions under ISRO, the Indian scientists have found out that the amount of subsurface water ice found within the lunar surface is many times higher than the water ice crystals found on the top layer of the surface. Which basically means if you can dig a few feet into the lunar soil, right, you are going to basically see a higher presence of water ice crystals, greater volume of water ice crystals, which is many times higher than the presence of water ice crystals on the surface. All right, so which means any future mission will focus on digging the lunar surface, at least for a few feet, to collect those samples, to study what is the presence of water inside the lunar surface as compared to presence of water on the top layer of the surface. And the study also has established that the presence of water ice in the North Pole is almost twice, double the concentration of water ice in the South Pole. Right? Until now, countries were largely thinking that South Pole should be the focus area. It will remain the focus area, but the interesting finding coming out from India, largely based on data from Chandrayaan-1, is that North Pole is believed to have twice the concentration of water ice crystals as compared to the South Pole. Now, this data is very crucial not just for India's lunar missions, but even for the other lunar missions being pursued by other countries, be it Japan, China, or even United States and European countries. All these spacefaring nations they are again getting involved in a lunar space race. Right? China is looking to send a manned mission by the end of the decade. The US has reactivated the Artemis program to send astronauts back to the moon. So in the future, if we have to plan, let's say, sample return missions, right, where a rover can dig the lunar surface, collect samples from the inside and get back, right, or if we have to send astronauts and set up a human habitation in few decades, identifying the presence of water is going to be crucial, because that will help in determining the landing sites. We can pick the most ideal landing site where water ice concentration is higher. That is why these studies are very important. Now, what could be the source of this water ice, especially the water ice present inside the surface? According to the Indian study, the source is largely because of the volcanic activity. Because of the volcanic activity, gases from the core of the lunar core has been pushed out towards the surface, which has brought up the water molecules closer to the surface. So volcanism seen during the Imbrian period of the formation of the moon has been seen as the reason for the presence of water ice in the polar areas, right, especially near the surface and right below the surface. So that is what we understand from this article. Essentially, it will help in picking the best landing site so that maybe tomorrow if there is a human habitation on the lunar surface, there can be a self-sustaining local water source. Next, on page 7, we have an article related to science and technology. It's related to particle physics and the standard model of physics. There are two important terms that are referred to in the article. One is quarks and the other is neutron star. Let's quickly understand the basic details about quarks and neutron stars. See, the article is very scientific, very technical, right? UPSC will not expect you to know all the details. You just need to know the basics about neutron stars, about quarks and gluons. Quarks are essentially the most fundamental of all particles that we know. Quarks are considered as the elementary particles that make up matter. Now you take any atom, right, be it from our body or from any object, you take up any atom. When you zoom into an atom, what do you see? You see electrons moving around an orbit around the nucleus where you have your protons and neutrons, right? Now, if you zoom in further, then you will come across these elementary particles. It's a fuzzy, branched, dotted network, right? It looks something like this. It's like these small specks or small sparks. These are called quarks, which are considered to be the most elementary of particles that makes up our universe. These dotted point-like particles present within your protons, neutrons, electrons at the subatomic level, right? They are called quarks, which are the most fundamental of particles, the most elementary of particles that we know. You also have something called gluons. These are different categories of subatomic particles found within an atom. And when it comes to quarks, there are 6 different types which vary by their mass. You have the up quark, the down quark, the charm quark, strange quark, top and bottom quark. These are the 6 types of quarks that researchers have identified. They have varying types of mass, and it's very important to note that these are the only elementary particles in nature that experience all the known forces of nature. They are impacted by magnetic field. They are impacted by gravitational force. They are impacted by cosmic rays, cosmic emissions. They are impacted by every other force available in nature. Is that clear? It's the only known elementary particle that interacts and gets affected by all the known natural forces present. Quarks and gluons together, these set of elementary particles, they are believed to give mass to your matter. It is believed that they are the ones which contribute mass to protons and neutrons, and this is where all objects, all material gains the mass from. It's believed it's quarks and gluons which are responsible for inducing mass to protons and neutrons in an atom, which adds the weight, the mass to every matter and every object. Now coming to neutron stars. Neutron stars are essentially the remnant of a dying star. When stars die out eventually, following a supernova explosion, right, all the outer surface is thrown out, it is dispersed. What remains is the massive core. As the star dies out, what remains is the massive core, which will have tremendous magnetic field. So when stars when they are at the last stage of their life cycle, right, the core of the star which remains, it will have tremendous magnetic field because it keeps compressing and creating large gravitational ripples, right? So around a neutron star, all the material, the plasma material, the ionized plasma present around it, it's all getting compacted towards the core. There is tremendous magnetic field and gravitational force present over here, and neutron stars emit a radiation as well. So researchers, astronomers study neutron stars to understand the origin of the universe, to understand the formation of a star and the death of a star. Is that clear? So just the basic details should be more than sufficient. Next, on page number 12, we have an article related to cybersecurity and science and technology. The article is referring to one of the techniques used in a cyber attack called phishing. The article says that India is one of the key geographies where phishing attacks are very, very high. Large number of phishing attacks are reported in the Indian cyberspace. So let's understand what exactly is phishing. Right? What do you mean by phishing with regard to cybersecurity? See, the term is actually drawn from the word fishing, which is the act of catching a fish. Now, when you go fishing, how do you catch a fish? Let's say you're using a fishing rod, right? You put a bait, you put some food item or a worm on the hook. You use a bait on the hook to attract the fish, to deceive the fish, right? The fish thinks that you're actually offering food and it tries to bite into the food item that you have put on the hook of the fishing rod. But it does not realize that it's being tricked, it's being deceived. It's a bait essentially. The moment the fish latches onto the hook, onto the bait, it gets trapped in the hook and you reel the fish in. That's how the fish gets caught. So essentially, phishing involves deception. It involves a trick. It involves the usage of a bait. Something similar happens in the cyber domain. All right? Victims can be tricked by cyber criminals. They can be deceived. They can be tricked to do something, to commit some action, which will make them vulnerable for a cyber attack. So since a bait and a deception technique is used, this is called phishing. It's based on the word phishing. But of course, both are completely different. It's just one similarity that exists here. The only similarity is that there is a bait which is used to lure the victim, to attract the victim, to deceive them, to trick them, to commit some action, to make them commit some action, which will make them exposed to a cyber attack. Now, for example, let me give an example so that you can easily understand what is a phishing attack. I am sure all of you would have received these WhatsApp messages or text messages or even emails, which look to be very authentic. Let's say the mail says that it's an email from your manager or an email from your bank. They would have used the same logos, the same font, color combination, right? It looks very real, very authentic. Or you might receive a mail from, let's say, Instagram or Facebook, right? It says the mail is from Instagram or Facebook and it's about your social media account. Now, the moment you click on the mail, you open that, the attackers would have put so much effort to design that email or let's say a website that it looks very real, very authentic. Let's say you have a bank account with ICICI, right? You get a mail which looks to be a mail from ICICI. In the sender's name, there would be ICICI included, right? But if you pay attention, you will notice that it's not a domain name. It would be something ICICI@gmail.com. Now, that's not an official mail ID, right? If you're observant, if you know the basics of cybersecurity, you'll pay attention to it. You'll know that it's a phishing email. But imagine someone who doesn't have the awareness. They just open the mail, they see ICICI somewhere in the sender's name. They think it's an original of authentic communication. They look at the mail as well, the same logo, font, color combination, everything has been used, right? Very clear sentences. It looks very authentic and very real. Now, the mail says that your bank account has been compromised, your net banking details have been compromised, you have to reset your password. So, the mail is asking you to do something, to commit some action, which is to enter your username, your password and try to change it. Now, the moment you do that, the moment you commit that action that the mail is asking you to do, you are basically getting tricked, you are getting deceived. You are the fish, right? They put a bait in front of you, you're latching onto it and you will get caught. So, there are many such frauds that happen. Right? They basically play on psychology, on human psychology. You might get mails or messages saying that you have won a lottery, or $10 million lottery. To receive the amount, you have to provide your details. Please click on the attachment, or click on this link, or download the attachment. The moment you commit the action, let's say you click on a link, it will take you to a fraudulent website where a malware gets downloaded. A virus or a worm gets infected, it infects your computer, and the attacker can gain access over your device. Right? Or let's say it's asking you to download an attachment and open it. You might actually think it's genuine communication. You'll download the file. Immediately, malwares get downloaded and your system can be hijacked. Right? Your personal details can be stolen. Or the attacker might simply observe and monitor your activities later to blackmail you. Or they might lock your system. They could do anything which is possible. Right? So such a deception technique which is used to carry out a cyber attack is called phishing attack. So there is a clear bait which is used to lure the victim, to attract the victim, to make them believe that it's genuine, it's authentic. And there is a clear deception, a trick which is employed. The moment you are tricked, the moment you fall for the deception and commit the action that they are asking you to do, you become a victim of a cyber fraud. Is that clear? So that is a phishing attack. It basically relies on human psychology and social engineering techniques. They are engineering your mind. The attackers are playing a mind game. They are tricking your mind to think that this communication is real, it's official, it's authentic. Right? The moment you do the action that they are asking for, you become a victim of phishing attack. It will lead to a kind of a cyber attack. Maybe malwares are downloaded or your personal information is stolen. Right? Your banking details are stolen. Your money is stolen from your bank account. Or they might simply observe, monitor the activities and later blackmail the victim. So any possibility exists once you become a victim of a phishing attack. And India is one of the key geographies with regard to phishing attacks. Next, we have a small article on page 14. It refers to the third aircraft carrier of China, which has been launched. Recently, we were discussing about aircraft carriers, right? I mentioned China's aircraft carrier program as well. So the third aircraft carrier, the Fujian aircraft carrier, this is the largest aircraft carrier that China has ever built. The previous two aircraft carriers are called Liaoning and Shandong. Just remember the names, you never know, UPSC might ask a question. And also note, China is building a fourth aircraft carrier, which is likely to be nuclear powered, which could be powered by a nuclear modular reactor. So this makes China one of the most formidable navies in the world after the United States. And when India just has two aircraft carriers, one of which is a very old one, China already has inducted 3 modern large aircraft carriers, and it's already building a fourth one, which could be nuclear powered. So this establishes China's maritime dominance across the Indo-Pacific. Coming to the last article for today. On page 14, we have an article related to AUKUS. We have studied about AUKUS in previous classes as well. I'll just refresh your memory. This is a security initiative, a defense initiative started in 2021, 3 years ago, between Australia, UK, and United States. These 3 countries started a defense partnership called AUKUS, and there are 2 pillars under AUKUS. Under pillar 1, the United Kingdom and United States are delivering nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia. To build the military preparedness of Australia, particularly against the Chinese dominance in the Indo-Pacific, UK and US are transferring nuclear-powered submarine technology. There are no nuclear weapons being transferred. No nuclear weapon technology is being provided. It's only submarine technology which is powered with nuclear reactors. Nuclear-powered submarines have an enhanced operational range, enhanced endurance. They can remain underwater for longer periods of time without having to come to the surface. Because your conventional diesel-electric submarines, they have to frequently come to the surface to recharge the batteries. But in a nuclear-powered submarine, there is no need for that. Right? The power supply is almost infinite. It can remain underwater for prolonged periods of time. The only limitation on a nuclear-powered submarine is the fatigue of the crew and the food and water supplies of the crew. If that is taken care of, a nuclear-powered submarine can remain underwater for anywhere between 4 to 6 months easily. So this increases the stealthiness of these submarines. It can't be easily detected by the enemy. Right? So under pillar 1 of AUKUS initiative, UK, US are transferring nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia. Now there is a second pillar which has been started. There is a pillar 2 which has been started. This will involve collaboration between these 3 countries in critical defense technologies. they will collaborate in the development and production of critical defense technologies such as artificial intelligence, usage of AI in warfare, or hypersonic missiles, underwater drones. Underwater drones are playing a massive role in warfare. Look at the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine especially has used underwater drones very effectively against the Russian Navy. So these three countries are collaborating in critical defense technologies under Pillar 2 of AUKUS, focusing on AI weapons, hypersonic missiles, underwater drones, and other critical emerging technologies. Now, what is the development here? The big development reported here is that AUKUS countries are willing to accept other like-minded powers under Pillar 2 of the initiative. Under Pillar 2, they are willing to accept South Korea, Japan, maybe even New Zealand. South Korea has expressed interest to join the AUKUS initiative under Pillar 2 of the collaboration. Under Pillar 1, no other country will be included. It's only Australia, UK, and US, where UK, US will transfer nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia. No other country will be included under Pillar 1 of AUKUS. But under Pillar 2, other like-minded democratic countries of the region are being considered for membership. South Korea has shown active interest. It's very eager to join Pillar 2 of AUKUS initiative. Even Japan and New Zealand are being considered because all these countries are allies. So if they join the initiative under Pillar 2 of AUKUS, they will be jointly involved in the development of these critical defense technologies. So that is the big development being reported here in this article. So this completes my discussion for today. Please take a look at the mains practice questions. Read the questions carefully, make a note of it, and I expect you to write an answer and post the answers in the comment section below. It's all based on what we have studied today. You just have to use the same points, preferably in the same order and structure, and write a well-structured answer. Please post the answers in the comment section so that it can help other aspirants as well. So that is it for today. I hope you have liked the session. I hope you have understood everything, and if you did, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. That is it for now. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.